What is up, guys? Welcome back to OverTakes. This is Misfit, and today we are recapping Week 17 in the Overwatch League, Week 2 of Countdown Cup Qualifiers. All right, so we got a bunch to talk about today. We're going to dive into the week that happened, and then we're going to talk some standings and where teams are as far as playoffs, the Countdown Cup itself, and all of that kind of good stuff. Before I do that, though, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me. All of your support's been greatly appreciated, whether it's been for the whole time we've been up since the beginning of the league or for the last week. Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. If you're new, just checking us out, thanks for stopping by. I do Overwatch League content 2 to 3 times a week, depending on what's going on. This week, we're going to have an extra episode because we got the knockout round going on Saturday or on Sunday morning. What I usually do is just a quick prediction show and throw that up in the morning, and then we'll talk about the results on Monday. So since a lot of these matches do have playoff implications and all that, I'm going to do a little bit further of a review before we get into that Countdown Cup discussion because they have implications for the playoffs and all that kind of stuff. But first, let's get into Week 17. All right, so this week was interesting to say the least. I mean, we started off on Friday and, well, we got Breadsticks. Finally, it took 17 weeks of the season, but finally the Vancouver Titans won, completed the bingo card, and did all the things. Kind of spectacular fashion over Boston. Boston looked terrible. They destroyed them. And, you know, the internet, of course, goes crazy and all that, but it does ruin the bread bowl for the last week of the season. But that's okay. I'm glad they won. Those guys were just grinding it out all season, getting hammered. And they finally got a win under their belt, and Boston just took about 6 steps back in that match. And the weekend in the whole for them. As far as some of the other storylines, we have a lot of things shaking down as far as the standings. We'll talk about that towards the end of the program after we go over some of the things that happened during the week. So, yeah, the Vancouver win was great. I was happy for those guys, and, you know, the breadstick memes just started pouring in for hours, potentially like a day or two. It was hilarious, but they did beat Boston, and I don't know what to say about Boston right now, but we'll get into them in a little bit. That was the highlight, really. The Vancouver Titans winning 3-0. Now, of course I had Boston, and so did everybody else. I think maybe 1 or 2 people might have picked Vancouver on a whim. Probably Boston haters, which I usually am in every other sport. But I could care less in this one about that kind of thing. But anyway, so let's move into some APAC talk. Let's talk about the week that happened over there first, and then we'll dive into NA, and then dive into the standings and all that. All right, so I was all over the yard with my predictions as far as NA. As far as APAC. I put way too much faith in the NYXL, and I'm just going to leave it at that. I was huffing all of the copium, hopium, all of the ums. I was high as fuck when I made those predictions, or at least the second one. They took a step back, too, much like Boston, where we thought that they were playing well, and this is the meta, and all the kind of things. And Philadelphia clocked them. Good job, Philly. You finally beat your nemesis in New York. The one team that has your number, you beat them and locked yourself into the knockout for the Countdown Cup, dealt New York a setback. And Philadelphia, you know, we're going to go over the team looks. Philadelphia this weekend looked fantastic. Look, this is how they should have looked all year long. Yeah, they did lose in a reverse sweep to Seoul, but you can't stop Philly from doing Philly things occasionally. Let's just leave that out there. They look good, though. They look the way we thought they were going to look all year long. Funny Astro looked good. Alarm looked like Alarm. And you had EQO doing all kinds of work. The tank line looked good. Everything was clicking for this team this weekend, even though they lost to Seoul. If you're a Philly fan, this is a good indicator of what potentially can happen coming up here in the knockouts with the Countdown Cup on the horizon, and for the regular season playoffs and getting to go to Dallas and potentially Los Angeles. I liked what I saw from them all across the board. Seoul just did Seoul things this weekend, you know, the normal. Lose 3-2 to Shanghai, and then reverse sweep the Philadelphia Fusion. And the gesture on main tank playing Orisa and some of that stuff, it seems to be working pretty well. They look decent enough in that front. 2U is playing as good as anybody in this region for the most part. Well, all right, maybe that's going a little too hard on 2U, but I mean, as far as like buying into 2U, he's not as on the Void level, but he's been playing really, really well, and I like what I've seen from him. It's added a lot to this team to have him in there, because I remember before we had Michelle on this team, and when he was in there, he looked like a really good main tank, a really good off tank, and it was kind of a question as why you're bringing 2U in and all this stuff, but he looks really good, and I like what they're getting out of him. And the one thing I harp on this team all the time, their supports look decent. Creative and Animo looked better than I've seen from them all year long. And, of course, you have Profit and Fitz doing their business. So, I guess, you know, when you have minimal games left in a season, that's when Seoul turns it on. And they looked pretty good all weekend long. And they did stumble against Shanghai. But Shanghai was trying against them. And with, well, Seoul... Shanghai looked good against them. And, of course, Guangzhou, who's a hot mess. But Seoul is looking really good, consistent, 3-1 again. They've been 3-1 in every tournament iteration that we've had all year long. They're relying a lot on Profit and Fitz to do their thing, and it's working. As long as they get a decent play from their tanks and from their supports, they're going to be hard to beat in the tournament. Now, they are beatable, as we've seen, where they lost to Shanghai, and Philly was pounding them pretty good, and then they turned it around and reverse swept them. But Seoul is looking really good. Chengdu, of course, looked really good. A lot easier schedule. I had New York beating them because I thought New York was, for some reason, I bought into all the bullshit with the fucking Excelsior again. But Chengdu looked great. And for God's sakes, Jinmu on Farah is just a god. He's unbelievable, and when he played Sombra and did some other things, he looked good too. He was playing really well. Of course, you have Leave doing all this stuff, and this whole team is also really good. I can't wait to see what happens in APAC as far as the final playoff run and all that. You're either going to have New York or Hangzhou in the mix too, but Philly, Shanghai, Seoul, and Chengdu are going to provide a lot of drama here, I think. I think this is going to be fantastic, especially when we have all the heroes unleashed again. We'll see where the meta goes and all that and what patch they're running and all that, but it's going to be fun to see. Post Countdown Cup, of course, is where I'm going. The rest of the stuff, New York, they just took 2 steps back. Their tank line looked meh again, and your DPS and Jonak can only carry so far, and when teams figure that out, the good teams, Philly, Chengdu, they're just gonna punish you, and that's what both of those teams did. They just punished New York, and at this point, we'll get into it more, but they're on the outside looking in as far as the regular season playoffs go. You have to see what Hangzhou does next week, but their schedule is not particularly hard, and the Spark could go 1-1 because they have Guangzhou in there. Hard to say what's going to happen. They look like they could be in as far as the Countdown Cup goes, where they would have to do some damage. They would have to get to the Hawaii portion and get some extra points to possibly jump over the Spark. But that's up in the air as we speak right now with that. And we'll talk, like I said, we'll hit on that in a little bit. So let's jump over to NA. This was a little bit more outside of Breadsticks being one. It was pretty much cut and dry. We did have some surprises in here, and we'll get to that in a sec. Atlanta is just asserting their dominance right now. They are so versatile. A team that we didn't think was going to be versatile, mind you. On the backs of Hawk, Gator, Pelican, and Kai this weekend was phenomenal. And their support line. This whole team, and that DPS rotation we'll talk about in 2 seconds, but this whole team is clicking right now. They have a plan, as much as people kind of gave them shit earlier in the year for just being one trick kind of comp thing, not having any plans going into matches, not being versatile, and I'm one of them included in this. They're a gatekeeper, all this stuff. They are just putting everything to rest right now, and they look fantastic. Look, Hawk is up there with Hanbin in my book right now, top 2 off-tanks in NA. Possibly in the entire league if you throw in Void. Space is looking really good. There's a lot of guys that are looking really good right now, but goddamn, they're so on it, the tank line. You can talk mechanics all you want about players and things like that, but these guys are probably one of the more intelligent teams in the league. Their ability to do things like peeling, marking players, just all of that stuff, they're just on it. Map knowledge, all of the things, using anything that they can to win these maps and knowing what heroes to play when, making swaps. We talked about Gator. His ball looked pretty decent when he was playing it this weekend, and Florida came to play against them in that first match. They were on the verge of losing to Florida, but good teams find ways to win, and they exploited mistakes that Florida makes, like Florida usually does. They make a key mistake here or there, and they took advantage of that and won. On Nepal, they figured out some of the things that Florida was doing, and mind you, it was a close match most of the way through, but they did the things they needed to do to win this match, which, props to them. I mean, I'm a Mayhem fan, and I was rooting for the Mayhem really hard. I thought we were looking really good, but beating Atlanta was a hard ask for this team, and they showed up. They looked like the Mayhem of the Melee. They were playing really well together. Oj looked good. DPS looked good. Everybody looked good. But mistakes here and there cost his team all the time. And that separates teams like Atlanta from them. And this is why they have, at this point, this was their 8th loss in a row. So, good showing, but couldn't finish the job. And in that 8-game losing streak, we're going to talk about the Mayhem here for a second, and we'll jump to a couple other teams and things that happened this weekend. But, in that 8-game losing streak, there were a few 3-2s that they lost where they could have very well won those and could be in a different position than they are right now. Instead of fighting to be in the play-ins for the final season playoffs, they could have been fighting with the Gladiators and the Outlaws and teams like that for positioning for the Melee. For the final season playoffs in the Countdown Cup, which they're still in contention. They have 2 games left against the Outlaws and the Gladiators. That's a rough ask to try and win both for all the things they need to win. But they look better than they've looked all year. They destroyed Boston. I don't know what's going on with Boston. We'll talk about them in a minute. But yeah, the Mayhem. They figured out, maybe if we just ride Yaki and everybody else kind of do what Seoul does, maybe let Yaki and BQB do their thing, and the rest of the team just keep it somewhere just play decent enough and don't do anything stupid kind of range, if you know where I'm getting at with that. They seem to be doing better with that stuff. Sometimes you just got to ride the good players, and it's not like the other guys are bad, but you have a guy like Yaki and someone like BQB on certain heroes. If you play them and they're on the right heroes, you're going to generally win and do what you have to do. They're looking pretty decent. It could be too little too late, though, right now for the Mayhem. Now, Boston, speaking of too little too late, I think we're getting there with them. I think they're lucky that they had a good string where they got ahead of the Mayhem. I mean, obviously, the one they want back is the 3-0 loss to the Titans. I don't think they were ready for the Titans to come out and play like they did. They were on their back foot the whole match, and it's kind of troubling, to be brutally honest, with them seeing how they've gone downhill in this hero pool thing. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, the 2 heroes that potentially would have been played were Sigma and Lucio, and it shouldn't make that much of a difference for a team like Boston, who has shown up in the past and played different things and showed different looks and looked pretty versatile and they got beat. they got, beat bad on Hanamura thing on the last map, but they just couldn't finish. And Vancouver played really well. They were on the verge, we thought, like earlier in the season, but then they kind of just went into this 0-3 run and, won threes and just not playing well. But they got it together for this one. I think they learned some stuff, and, their players are good enough to be in this league. Those guys are not bad. And it's just, I don't know what happened all year, but Vancouver beat Boston. And, some of the things maybe with Boston are rearing their ugly head. Maybe they're tired. I don't know. But they look terrible this week. And it's really hard to gauge at this point in the season, where a team's mental is at. But it seems like Boston is in a bad mental spot. And as far as like Dallas goes, they're 2-2, still hanging in on the Countdown Cup to go to the Countdown Cup. But they have locked the first position in. So, I mean, they're fine. Atlanta buried them kind of, but they did clock London pretty good. You could say they didn't look good against London, but they were kind of toying with them, playing with different things. They look decent enough. Fearless is learning how to play ball better every time he goes out there, and he's playing a little bit of a Ressa, things that he's uncomfortable on during this time, which he needs to do, which is, for me, that's fine if you're running stuff like that. Same thing, Shanghai's doing that over in the East. They're running stuff, trying different things, seeing what's working, what's not working for future play, and resting people and all that kind of stuff. But they're running different comps, trying different things against teams, and they're seeing who they work against and who they don't. It's like almost like a scouting thing. They're running the Countdown Cup qualifier matches, the 4 that we had, as live scrims, essentially. And they're 2-2. They beat the teams they should, pretty much. They probably should beat Atlanta if you really want to get down to it, but Atlanta's playing really well, and Atlanta has to win every game and then some to secure a spot in the top 3. So they're gunning for that. So you have that going. Dallas is already locked in, and they'll be fine. There were points in that match where Dallas was playing like Dallas, just doing ridiculous things, but Atlanta was ready for him in that. But I have no fear that Dallas is fine. Toronto, another team that took care of business, and they beat the hapless Justice 3-0. I don't really want to spend any more time on the Justice. It is what it is. The team does not want to initiate fights. They finally got down against Vancouver. They don't have a go button. They don't know what to do when Assassin goes in. EMP. It's like playing rank, guys. They're like playing your average ranked team. You got good players on the team, and then you got guys doing plays. There's no communication. They're yeeting EMPs when they shouldn't, just doing things, not initiating at all. It's like I said, it's like a ranked game. You have to hit the W key. In Washington, they should just be called the Washington Justice, because they don't have a W button key or in the first part of their name. Terrible joke, I know. So that's kind of what NA shook down. Let's talk about standings, which is where the meat and potatoes of things are going to be for the next couple of weeks, trying to figure everything out. All right, let's talk regular season standings. Things are pretty much the same in NA. We haven't had anything move up and down, really. Well, except for Boston moves down to 9th, hanging by a thread, where Toronto has moved themselves ahead a couple of games and kind of put themselves in a safe spot for now, in my estimation. I thought they were the one that might falter, but they took care of Washington, because Washington's crap, and Washington can't lose any more games, so good for them. They're fine for now, but Paris is still hanging on. They got games left. Here's the teams that we have that have games left: San Francisco, Houston, the Gladiators, and the Eternal. And does Toronto? Toronto has games as well. Yeah, Toronto's got games. So everybody in the top 9, including and then the Mayhem are also involved in this. Everybody who has a stake in the playoffs or seeding or anything like that, Countdown Cup aside, is playing this weekend coming up. And there's going to be a lot of big things going on. Now let's talk about the scenario here. If you're a Boston fan, Mayhem fan, Eternal. So the way it stands, the Mayhem have to win 2 games. They have a -8 map differential. Boston has -4, and they're set. Paris is -2, but still has 2 games left. The Mayhem have the Outlaws and the Gladiators left. They have to beat both of them, and in some combination to get themselves up, they have to pick up 5 maps to jump Boston. They can tie Boston with 1 point, like 1 win if they beat Houston or the Glads, because of the melee where they got the extra league point for that. So there is a chance that they could jump up. I think map differential is the big thing with that. If they lose, they're kind of in trouble. They have to pick up 5 maps somehow to go past Boston, because Boston is not playing anymore, and they have 2 matches. Now, the other scenario is they could get into the melee, or I keep saying melee. They could get into the Countdown Cup knockouts and tournament, but they would have to go. So they would have to be, right now they're 1-1 plus map differential. Say they split and they go 2-2. They have to pick up a map to bounce Dallas down and pray that the Gladiator Shock or Houston or somebody loses. Toronto. There's a lot of scenarios, but they could get into the knockout still. They're kind of hanging on by a thread right now. But if they beat Houston, it's a good indicator they're going to be there. And Paris has to lose a game or 2 in order for them to get up in there, and then they'd have to take care of business in the Countdown Cup and pick points up and stuff like that to hop Boston or Paris or something like that, which I don't think Paris is going to lose both games. Paris, I think they have an easy schedule here. Yeah, they have a big game against Toronto and London. So if they split, there's potential for the Mayhem to make the melee, but they still would have to beat teams that go to Hawaii in order to have the potential to pick up more points to jump any of these teams that are in their way, whether it be Toronto, Paris, Boston. If they won, which I don't think so. They're playing decent. I don't think they're playing that good. They would have to do that to jump, maybe a Washington or Toronto. But if they got in and perhaps they got to the, like they did in the last one where they were in the losers match final or something like that and pick up a point, that might put them up a little bit higher. So it's going to be interesting. But seeding-wise, yeah, everything is kind of, all the teams that have games left are going to be playing. I think what we're going to see shake down is, it looks like to me, Atlanta's got to keep San Francisco at bay, essentially. So they got to keep winning and going to the tournament and basically do what Dallas did in the first 3, except for they're doing it in the last 3 tournaments. And if they look like they can win this one. If they win that, they could potentially get some more points and secure that second spot. And they have, San Francisco, Houston, and the Gladiators breathing down their neck right now. So we'll see what happens there. Now, to the APAC region, as far as season standings playoff-wise goes, we're looking pretty set as far as 4 of the teams, in my estimation here. You have Shanghai, Seoul, Chengdu, and Philly. And then it's going to be between Hangzhou or New York. We talked a little bit about Hangzhou's schedule coming up. They have they have to play Chengdu, Hangzhou, so that's most likely going to be a loss. And then they potentially can win against Guangzhou Charge. I don't think that's much of a stretch to expect Hangzhou to win that. So that would put them tied with New York as far as the Countdown Cup, but season standing wise, that would put them at 8-8 and 1 game up and pretty much securing that, unless somehow in the Countdown Cup, much like the Mayhem scenario, if New York solidifies that, somehow Hangzhou doesn't get to a 0 map, like they'd have to 3-0 Guangzhou and maybe, I don't know. There's a scenario where they could jump up into that 4th spot for the Countdown Cup. That would nix New York for the season, but New York would have to, of course, do something miraculous. Of course, if they get Philly, because it's going to be 1 versus 4. Philly, I would be a little, God, that would, oh man, please no. Philly fans, I'm sorry, but if that happened, where you had to play New York, and New York goes to the Hawaii matches, and you don't for the final one where it looks like it's going to be between you and Seoul, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say except for keep your hatred for New York burning, because there's another team on your list that you can add to the hatred. You know, you hate the Mets, you hate the Yankees, you hate the Giants. I understand all this. I lived in the area, except for I was a fan of the New York teams. And, yeah, so, you know, if you're a Flyers fan, you hate the Rangers, even though you haven't really had any contention with the Rangers in the last, since I was a small child. But anyway, you can add the NYXL to your list of teams that you hate because they've jobbed you if they do this again. But it's a stretch for New York to get into this, is what I'm getting at, guys. So the way it looks to me, I mean, regular season-wise, that top 5 in APAC, I think it's pretty solidified. Potentially, if Hangzhou just literally shits the bed, they could drop out. But still, if they lost 2 games, they still would potentially have a map differential on the New York Excelsior. Just if we went where we're at right now, and it's kind of solidified unless New York does something in the play-ins, or not the play-ins, the Countdown Cup tournament itself. Like they got through somehow on some miraculous thing and won a game or 2 and got a couple of points. I mean, they're tied right now with Hangzhou point-wise, but all Hangzhou has to do is to beat the Charge, and they'll be able to be a point ahead. So New York would have to finish in second in the tournament and get 2 points to tie them, or to jump them. I'm sorry. So that, you know, that's the regular season outlook. You know, we'll talk about what games mean what on the preview episode. Remember, it's going to be earlier this week, guys, because we do have the Thursday games plus knockouts on Sunday. So long, big weekend of stuff going on there. The real quick Countdown Cup, it looks pretty solidified as far as you have Atlanta in NA. Got a lot of teams 1-1 here. We're going to see what happens. Potentially Shock get themselves in a knockout round. Same thing with Toronto. Paris could potentially move up, and Houston could potentially move up, depending on what the Mayhem, etc., and what have you, and all that stuff. All of the scenarios that happen. So it's going to be an interesting weekend coming up here. Same thing, APAC. Shanghai could. I don't. Shanghai's not going to go, and I don't think they care. Dallas, the same thing. They're in it right now, Dallas, but you still have it. The Gladiators haven't played. San Francisco, Toronto has 2 more games. Mayhem have 2 more games. They could sneak into the knockouts. They really could. But they also don't care as much about it either. I think they're using these as tools to prepare for the playoffs. I am kind of with some of the teams that have to play in the future. We'll talk about that one before we get to the playoffs. I don't like taking long breaks. Bites teams in the ass in any sport. If you look at football, where you have these buys and things like that, a lot of times teams will come in off a wild card weekend because they've been playing. They didn't have that week off. Yeah, sometimes you need the rest and all that stuff, but your sharpness, your focus, your clarity sometimes does not re-register once you get back in. I mean, we saw the Dragons amp it up a little bit this weekend more than they have. So at least in the first week, you know, where they were kind of lax, playing but not playing. You know, they got the 3-2 from New York, and, you know, Philly housed them. I think that was their week of rest and sorting things out, trying new guys in, getting them a little bit of experience and whatnot, and resting some of the big guys that they have that need to rest. But taking a long break is going to be interesting to see what happens with some of these teams when it happens. All right, guys. So that is going to do it for this one. Talked about the standings and, you know, what happened this week. It was a fun week, great week. I got to watch more than I thought I was going to get to watch this weekend, so I was quite excited about that. We're shaking down. We have 1 regular season week left, guys. And then we have a tournament, and then we have play-ins, and then we have the finals and all that stuff. We'll talk about the playoff schedule of programming coming up either next episode or the episode after that, because I got a lot of things going on, and we're going to discuss how this is going to shake down. Anyway, before I leave, I want to thank all you guys once again. Thanks for all of your support. It's greatly, greatly appreciated. If you're new, thanks a lot for stopping by. If you hit a like, hit a subscribe, and all the YouTube jazz, that would be fantastic. This is Misfit. I'm out. Everybody stay safe. Have a good rest of your day. And I will talk to you on the next one.